On today's show, what will determine if the Capitals take a step forward or back in the 25-26 season? Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting the FanDuelApp.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the questions facing the Capitals in the 2025-2026 season. Will they take a step forward or will they take a step back? And ultimately, what will determine that? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about the retooling masterclass by the Capitals. It seemed like for a while there that this team was facing a tear it down to the studs rebuild, but they were able to seamlessly retool on the fly. How did they get it done? And then to close out the show, we'll talk about the youth in depth and how they will need to step up if the Capitals will be successful in the upcoming season here. But just to get it going here, we're talking about what hinges on the Capitals going forward and going back. And it's going to be a different season for the Capitals, right? As they don't have that Gretzky goal chase on the forefront. It wasn't last season. It didn't even really seem about the Capitals making it to the playoffs or making it to the Stanley Cup. It was all about, can Alex Ovechkin catch and pass Wayne Gretzky? Well, now all of that is in the rearview mirror. I know that there are other distractions that they're trying to insert in there. Like, is this going to be Alex Ovechkin's last season with the Capitals? And he has handled it skillfully by simply saying that he's unsure. Do I think that Alex Ovechkin knows for sure, but he doesn't want it to be a distraction for what could be his last season in the NHL? I think that he wants to make a valiant effort. I think the Capitals want to make a valiant effort to try to make a deep push, or dare I say, a Stanley Cup win. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. And the crew's still here. I talk about the youth on this team, but Ovi's still here. Wilson, Strome, Pierre-Luc, Dubois. That is your leadership core right up front. That is like the basement, the foundation of the Capitals. And the question is, like I said, heading into this season with that good foundation in place, are the Capitals still relevant? And can they still win at the same clip that they did last year when they don't have the distraction of the Gretzky chase? Now, on one hand, you might think to yourself, well, it should be easier. There's no distractions. But on the other hand, I think that the Gretzky goal chase was a bit of a distraction. And when your team is scoring a lot of goals, when Ovi's scoring a lot of goals, surprise, surprise, your team's winning a lot of games. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it and ultimately how it comes down to the team's roster depth. Now, Alex Ovechkin, 40 years old here. I don't think that he's going to score 50 goals anymore, but he's still going to produce. And one of the things that we saw with Ovi last season is they actually had better production, or he had better production in more of a limited role. And it's all about, that core. And Tom Wilson, the captain in waiting, he's got to stay healthy, as we know that he leads with a physical flair. And he's got to be that power forward who sets the tone physically. Now, when I say physically, that doesn't mean that he has to drop the mitts all the time, but he is the guy that is going to be the deterrent. And yes, if the time calls for it or the situation calls for it, he has to be the guy that drops the mitts. But when we talk about the youth, again, I'm talking about the foundational pieces, and Dylan Strome is far and away one of those pieces as well. An underrated pickup by the Capitals, as we see that he had great success putting up big numbers being that first line center with Alex Ovechkin. He helped stabilize that center position when the team desperately needed it. And he's going to need to continue to be that playmaker to help elevate Alex Ovechkin, because Ovi can do great things. And we saw how great he has played throughout his entire career, but he's had that great play and great success because he's always had the fortune of playing with a great center. Think Backstrom, think Dylan Strome. That is the big key here. And where the Capitals have a bit of an abundance of wealth, I guess you could say, is they have a really great option at second line center as well. A guy who, like I said, could get a look at the first line, maybe in the preseason, just to see what they have. But Dubois is kind of a fascinating case because this is a guy who, when he's locked in, he is a difference maker. He also elevates the play of the guys around him. I mean, take a look at Connor McMichael and how he grew by leaps and bounds. And sometimes it was Protas playing on that second line as well. Big, strong down the middle. And if he can find consistency, again, suddenly you've got a great 1-2 punch going right up the middle there. As we know, Nick Dowd holding it down on that fourth line as well. But beyond those big names, you're going to need the next wave. And when I say it's not, the youngest players, but I'm talking about the younger-ish talent, I guess is what I'm going to say. And I'm talking about Connor McMichael and Alexei Protas, who I just spoke about here, how they had great success playing under Spencer Carberry systems. Also, some of the time playing on that second line with Pierre-Luc Dubois. And McMichael put up career numbers last year. Really showed that he belongs in the NHL. He's got that skill, speed, and he's got the confidence now. And, confidence is one of those tricky things. It's not easily quantifiable. You're not going to see it on the back of the hockey card, but it's apparent. And he's playing with confidence just based on he's seeing great returns, and also that he's playing confidently because he knows that Spencer Carberry has the trust in him. So those are big players in there. And like I said, Protas is huge as well. That big body who can protect the puck and wear down opponents. Not intrinsically a tough guy. He's not going to be the guy that's going to drop the mitts all the time. But he is huge. He is towering. He skates well. He's got a great shot. And at 6'6", he's not easy to move. That you can try to move him, but it's going to take a lot. But it's about turning that size into consistent production. I think that when we talk about players that took a step forward, I think the true gauge, the litmus test for these players is, can they duplicate that success? And those are going to be important storylines to follow, especially with the guys like Connor McMichael and Alexei Protas. And then you add, the filler players around it as well. Anthony Beauvillier, who was a pleasant addition at the trade deadline, that a bit of a journeyman. And, you were thinking to yourself, okay, so that's what you have up your sleeve. Well, Spencer Carberry has called him a Swiss Army knife, can play seamlessly up and down the lineup. At times played on the first line with Alex Ovechkin when he played in Pittsburgh, had some time playing with Sidney Crosby, a huge player. Brandon Duhaime as well. Just a key piece on that Capitals fourth line, that he has a great rapport, a great relationship with Nick Dowd, and it's going to be interesting to see who is the other player on the right wing. Front runner, of course, is Justin Sordiff and Sonny Milano. And, he's a bit of an interesting case as well, as there was kind of a foregone conclusion, I think, with a lot of people, but myself included, that they have a lot of young talent, but you also need some players that have been there and they've done that. And like I've said, this is the greatest version of Sonny Milano that I've seen in quite some time. So my position on Sonny has changed a bit, that I understand his value a little bit more, because a lot will be determined on how this youth progresses. And if they don't progress on track, you need guys like Sonny Milano who know how to play and have more NHL hours on their odometer. These are the depth kind of players who can give you scoring on the third and fourth lines. And then, like I said, it is the young players. And some of these players are a little bit younger than others. I'm talking Leonard, who had a sip of coffee with the Capitals at the latter part of the season in the playoffs there. Hendrik Lapierre, who got signed that bridge deal, who this is his make or break season. And Justin Sordiff, right? The guy that the Capitals gave up 2 draft picks to acquire from the Florida Panthers. Again, another player from what we've seen from camp is going to be next level. We know the camp starts on Thursday here, so we're going to get a nice look at not just pontificating, but what actually these players are like in real life. And if those players can step up, Leonard, Hendricks, LaPierre, sort of these kind of guys, that could be a game changer. Because at some point, and this is going to be the season that you need that youth movement to kick in. We're past the point of the Capitals organization where you can rely exclusively on the Ovi Wilson Strome trio to carry the offense every single night. That is not sustainable. And I don't have any real fear of that. I at least know that the second line can hold its own, and the fourth line takes on a role of its own as well. The third line, as always, is a bit of a question mark, and I think that a lot of those questions will be answered in the preseason. Now, let's switch to defensively, and John Carlson, right, a guy that carried the bulk of the mail, playing 20, 25 minutes plus a night, and they did a good thing by bringing in a skilled defenseman who has an offensive flair, as well as Jacob Chychrun to help eat up a lot of those minutes. Because what we realized before Chychrun was here is that Carlson can't do it alone. He can do a lot, right? And he has saved the Capitals on many occasions, whether defensively or offensively, but he's at the point of his career. And it's just not fair to think that he should be able to do it alone. So you got Chychrun in there, who was a great addition, and Marty Faravari as well. And if you want to talk about a quantifiable impact, take a look at what the Capitals look like minus Martin Faravari last year. So huge. And then, of course, Rasmus Sandin as well is part of the next wave, the future and the present, I guess is what I'm going to say. So things are pretty dialed in on the blue line. In addition, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who took a step forward last year. Now, widen the lens a little bit on the Capitals blue line. They made a great acquisition in the offseason because they didn't want to go into the postseason. Or even just the regular season on a lengthy stretch if one of those key defenders gets injured. Now, the unique position that they have is Declan Chisholm. Early indicators, I have not seen a lot from him yet, but what I've seen from him in his previous stops around the NHL stands to be at least a good extra. In that same breath is Dylan McIlrath. Another guy that leads with a physical edge. If you want a guy in there to drop the mitts and it's not Tom Wilson, Dylan McIlrath will fit that bill quite well. But the part, that's a bit hard on Dylan McIlrath is they could have used him in the postseason, but by his own admission was not the greatest skater. So there is definitely some pros and cons when it comes to Dylan McIlrath, but all things considered, a great option. Logan Thompson, Charlie Lindgren, that 1A, 1B tandem, that's not going anywhere. And if there is injuries, you got another great option in Clay Stevenson. As we know, Hunter Shepard is no longer in the mix, that it is going to be one heck of a season. If the team is ready and they're steady, this team has a shot to hang around the playoff bubble again. I'm not saying they're a lock. I'm really not saying that. It's too early to say, and I need to see a whole lot more from this roster, big picture. But if Alex Ovechkin can continue to elevate his game and the players around lead, in that direction as well, I think the Capitals will be in a good position. It's going to be a fine line between the veterans and the young players on the roster really taking a step forward. In a lot of ways, it's ultimately all up to them. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Capitals retooling masterclass. Listen, some of it was kind of on accident, coincidental, based on just situations presented to them. In any event, a masterclass by former GM Brian McClellan and what we've seen from Chris Patrick as well. I'll discuss straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love it using FanDuel because it fits however you like to play, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So say you're watching the Commanders, or maybe you're a Ravens fan, but say you want vested interest in all of the games. Open up the FanDuel app, all of a sudden it got that much more exciting. It's quick and easy to use and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays if you need it. So are you ready to play? Download the app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about the retooling of the Capitals roster here and how it was pretty seamless. It was fairly painless. To be clear here, a lot of questions, last summer or the summer before, rather, when it was the addition of Pierre-Luc, Dubois, and Radish and Mangiapane, and like, wow, that's an influx of players, but are they going to elevate the Capitals? They did just that in what I'm going to call an aggressive retool here, because, when this team is facing a full rebuild, say a tear down to the studs, it could have gotten crazy. Real crazy. And I speculated on it as much that if this team was ready to just tear it all down and start all over again, you could have seen some big players on the move. I'm talking Tom Wilson, and oftentimes they throw around Sidney Crosby with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but say the Capitals were crazy about this just massive rebuild, which I don't think would have ever been the case. You might have even seen the likes of like an Ovechkin say that this team was just thirsty to get that much better. But what did this team do wisely? Something that is a juxtaposition of what they've done before is it's not, kicking the can down the road for this win now mode. They realized that Backstrom, Ovechkin, Oshie, those kind of guys have put the Capitals in a great position for years. They were getting older. We know that Nick Backstrom had that hip resurfacing procedure done. We know that TJ Oshie had back problems, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and all the issues that surrounded him, that there was a change that needed to take place. And the writing was on the wall. You knew that this team was making a change in a different direction. When you saw Hathaway and Orlov traded out to Boston, you're like, wow, this team is getting serious. And they didn't have to get too crazy. If you think back what they did, they brought in Dubois, who definitely stabilized and solidified that second line. And in that, they're doing something that they haven't done before, and that's trusting the youth. I'm talking Leonard, LaPierre, McMichael, and the addition of Sortif as well. And they're going to be a part of the mix and a big part of the Capitals' rise and fall. And Carberry was in an interview with VSGA in a Q&A, and he was talking about when he takes a look at guys like Nick Dowd, you see what that means. Dowd's never going to be the flashiest guy on the ice, but he does the little things: face-offs, penalty kill, leadership in the bottom six. And when they were talking to Carberry about it, it's interesting that was one of the things that he led with, that, you would think it was Ovechkin or Wilson, but, Nick Dowd, just to kind of speak to the volumes of the Capitals having great options in lines 1 through 4, that Nick Dowd is a huge player. And that speaks of, all the way from Alex Ovechkin all the way down to the fourth line and Nick Dowd. That speaks of the culture of this team and the accountability. And, when you mix that together, when you have your Ovechkin, you have your Nick Dowd and everything else in between, you add a player like Wilson, who's now gearing up to be the future captain, which is no surprising. He is the heartbeat of the franchise. Alex Ovechkin right now, but in a second breath to that is Tom Wilson, who is already demonstrating leadership qualities, welcoming the new players to this team and that kind of thing. But that's the tricky part, right? Is the tightrope that you walk between not wanting to get rid of the nucleus of the team and making tactful decisions on parting with certain players, bringing certain players in, and how well that it has worked for the Capitals. When you go aggressive retool route, you're kind of threading a needle. You're asking Ovi, Carlson, and Wilson to keep competing while hoping the younger guys grow into stars. And one of the big things, right, is can the youth step forward and take on a big responsibility? That you saw the subtractions of Mangiapane, Radish, Alexei, these kind of guys, and you might be quick to diminish their role with the team. With that said, those players were on the active roster and were a contributing factor in the Capitals' success last year. How are the young players and some of the younger veterans that were added to this team, how are they going to take this team to the next level? So you're going to need to see more. Connor McMichael, who took steps forward at that second line left wing, we need for him to be that third line center to finally bring stability to that third line. Elevate it so you have a strength in lines 1 through 4. He's got to take that next step. And Ryan Leonard as well. High hopes, back-to-back 30-goal seasons at Boston College, killed it on the international stage. It's a league of what have you done for me lately? I'm not saying that I expect him to shoot to the moon right out of the gate, but we are going to need to see him prove that he's NHL ready and not just a prospect a type that is going to take a while to bloom. You add to that mix LaPierre. He's going to need to show that he can handle the grind of a full season. We need consistency from Hendrix LaPierre. It was kind of a life preserver thrown to him with that bridge deal to say, hey, we've given you your opportunity. This is your opportunity to make good. And it's ultimately up to Hendrix LaPierre to seize the moment. What we have seen early in these informal skates is him on the wing. And I think he'd be happy on the wing. I think ultimately he'd like to play center, but so would Connor McMichael. That regardless of whether he is a wing or a center, we're going to need to see him step forward. As far as Dubois is concerned as well, that it wasn't a one-off last year, that he can continue to see that growth. And I don't think it's a one-off. If anything, I want to say that season that he had with the Kings was a bit of a one-off because you've seen him knock it out of the park with Columbus and Winnipeg. And I ultimately think he was a mismatch in LA. What we saw, in my hunch, I'm hoping, I guess, is that we saw a bit of the real Pierre-Luc Dubois this last season. We need for him to continue to take it to the next level. And regardless of who he's playing with, again, I've toyed with the idea of it being Crystal on the left line or left wing, and Ryan Leonard on the right wing. Regardless, if it's them or not, we need to see consistency in lines 1 through 4. If you're asking me, you take a look at the pot, you take a look at the ingredients that were thrown in there. There is the makings of a great team. It's all going to depend on the chef, right? That can he fashion it together to make a beautiful dish, or is it just going to be a bunch of ingredients that don't amount to anything? A lot of this is a leap of faith. That we know the nucleus. We know what we have in Wilson and Ovechkin and these kind of guys, and we don't know so much what we have in the youth talent. We've seen what they have been able to do at lower levels, whether it be juniors, in some cases at the AHL level. We need to see contributions from the young and older players if this team is serious about making a push in the coming season. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the youth and the depth and who will need to step up. I'll discuss straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And the thing I love about Monarch Money is they were able to take a look at my finances, see where I was spending my money wisely and where I could use a little bit of work, and also help plan my financial future together with my wife. So if you want to take control of your finances, you need Monarch Money. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. In the final segment here, we're talking about the youth, the path forward, and what the Capitals need to do to make a push forward. Winning the first playoff round since 2018, that's good. But I want more. I think you as Capitals fans want more. So what is at stake? What will ultimately hinge if the Capitals take a step forward or back? Before I even get into it, I'm going to answer the question. It is the biggest question facing this team. Is the youth ready? Like I talked about in this show, we know what we have in Wilson, Ovechkin, the foundation of this team. The young talent, the prospects on the Capitals, they need to prove that they're more than just successful at the junior level, at the college level. They need to be NHL ready. And when I say what hinges on that is because the Capitals, Chris Patrick, they pushed their chips in that this youth is going to take them to the next level. Because if they're not ready, they're going to be left scrambling, looking for the phones, looking for the waiver wire to bring in veterans to this team that will help, hopefully, fill the gaps on this roster. But it's not always as easy as it sounds. Like, we're going to push our chips in on the youth, and if they're not good, well, we'll just call some people and bring them in. They did that last season. Remember Lars Eller? It was going to be Hendrik Lapierre's job at that third-line center last year. Not the case. It was going to be Scarbosa's job. Not the case. They brought in Lars Eller. Now, this wasn't the 2018 Lars Eller, so I think you get the point of what I'm trying to make here is the Capitals didn't make any big moves in the offseason. We're talking sort of Declan Chisholm, these kind of guys. They didn't do anything else, really. They, some depth players down in Hershey, some of them might pop up on the big team here. So it is going to be a risky move. A risk worth taking? I guess time will only tell. Ryan Leonard is the biggest name to watch. That is for sure. We need for Ryan Leonard to be that 30-goal scorer that we saw at Boston College. If he doesn't score 30 goals, is it a bust? No, but he definitely needs to be a big contributor in the Capitals offense. He is one of the future building blocks. He's got that power forward style and reminds people of Wilson. And if he has that mentor in Tom Wilson, hopefully he can take a page of Wilson and learn what it's like to be an NHL player and help in the Capitals' pursuit offensively. Lapierre, again, he is a player that we've been waiting for him to take on a full role for years. This year is make or break. Make no mistake about it. Connor McMichael, as we said, is trending up. I expect him to go forward. Protas, he could be one of those guys that continues to impress, right? That wasn't a one-off. Last year wasn't a flash in the pan. He's going to need to prove that because actions, statistics speak louder than my words. They also took a gamble on Justin Sordiff, right? That Chris Patrick said that they're giving up 2 draft picks because there were a lot of other teams giving up 1 draft pick that we had to, bully up, and we had to be the ones that, pushed it over the top. Listen, his numbers at the AHL level for the Checkers, for the Panthers, are good. Is that going to translate on the NHL with the Capitals? Again, Chris Patrick really believes that he said he will be playing on the Capitals this season, not down in Hershey. That's a leap of faith, right? That he is going to be able to help elevate this team and, not only play on the wing. He is a guy that's capable of playing center, but still a bit of a question mark. On the back end, you've got guys like Carlson logging big minutes. What kind of minutes can we expect from him this coming season? I know that they always talk about limiting how much time he gets, but with that said, he still seems to chew up a lot of minutes each and every game, season in and season out. Why? Because he excels. He does it responsibly. That you can plug and play any defender out there. You're not going to get the kind of production or defense that you get in good old number 74. But that's where Chychrun and Sandin and those guys come in. That those are the players that are going to be here, when Carlson retires or moves on to his next team. And both of those guys can move the puck. Both can chip in offensively, and both take some load off of Carlson. One of the big reasons Chychrun was brought in, and Sandin, who is taking steps forward as well. Then you add Fehervary glue, steady defensively, plays tough minutes, and still young enough to keep growing. We need for him to stay healthy. I can't, overstate that enough. That is the case. Like I said, you got Thompson, you got Lindgren. That's huge that you have a really great tandem in your number 1 and number 2. Some teams don't have a great number 1. Because if this team is good, they could go on a heater right out of the gate. And, if Logan Thompson is the guy or Charlie Lindgren, I don't really care what is the case. I expect for them to split the workload during the regular season and one of them to take over the reins in the latter part of the season in the playoffs. A really great option. But this team needs to elevate because if they're shaky, the offense isn't strong enough yet to bail them out yet. That the goalies are only going to be as successful as the offense and the defense playing in front of them. So the path forward is pretty clear. The veterans need to keep leading, the kids need to step up, and the goalies will stabilize things and keep the Capitals in the game. There's already people saying that the Capitals got a bit lucky last year. Again, perennially every year that they got lucky, that they're not going to be good enough. I like that. I like the Capitals as underdogs, and I think that they will take a step forward. It's really early to estimate where they're going to finish. I don't, I'd like to say I see them as Stanley Cup winners, but I don't want to be overly optimistic. I am what I guess I would say cautiously optimistic. A lot will be determined in the coming days and weeks here as we see the chemistry on the lines, the defensive pairings. How does the youth integrate with the veterans on this team and vice versa? How does Declan Chisholm as a depth player is Crystal ready to take a step forward? Is Ryan Leonard ready to take on a full NHL season? These are the big questions. Those are the things that will hinge whether the Capitals take a step forward or back. The veterans, like I say, can they maintain? Can they elevate? And can the players underneath of them, can they elevate their game to the bar that's set by the veterans on this team? If they, in fact, can do that, I think the sky's the limit for this team. If a lot of the young players aren't quite what we perceive for them to be, this could be a step back season. It's ultimately up to them. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.